If you guys have ever followed the news or just in general have been interested in Russia, then you might have seen this footage. Yes, people, your eyes are not lying to you. Those are videos of the Russian Federation destroying perfectly fine edible foods. And I know that after watching that video, especially if you're one of those people who think that Russia is a country that always does the best for its citizens, you might have a very justified question. What the hell is happening? Well guys, the videos that we just took a look at are the results of Russia's so-called counter-sanctions, which was essentially a time back in the year of 2014 when Russia destroyed tons and tons of perfectly edible Western foods after completely banning the import of Western and European foods into Russia as a way to show the West what for. And they definitely have not shot themselves in the foot with this. So, what is up guys, it is your boy Roman, your favorite neighborhood Russian, and in today's video, we are going to be talking about Russia's weird relationship with sanctions and foods, and how sometimes that even leads to Russia completely destroying perfectly fine foods. And I also want to talk about how Russia still uses foods to this very day to achieve its political goals and also essentially bully other countries into submission. So, essentially, this last trend of Russia banning imported foods in order to hurt the West, which in turn makes those foods more expensive and less affordable for the regular Russian people, yes, it is still very much going on today, and actually, just recently, there's been a story that actually involves Russia and Ecuador that shows this really well, where essentially the country of Ecuador was planning to send old Russian Soviet military equipment to America, which would then be sent to Ukraine. And Russia essentially threatened Ecuador that they will ban the import of bananas from Ecuador to Russia if they do this, despite 9 out of 10 bananas in Russia being imported from Ecuador. Yes guys, this is a real news story that has unfortunately went by pretty unnoticed in the West. For example, usually to keep up with my news, I like to use Ground News. And here I am on the Ground website on the article about Ecuador backtracking on plans to send weapons to Ukraine. And if you guys do not know what Ground News is, it's essentially the ultimate news comparison platform, a kind of a news aggregator on ultra settings. And you can use Ground News yourself if you go over to ground.news/NFKRZ through the link on the screen or the link in the description. So here in this article about Ecuador and Russia, it shows me that there's a total of 12 news sources that cover this article. And I can actually go down and individually check out every single article that covers this topic. Ground News allows you to see everything about the news you're consuming, including their political bias, the factuality, and also the ownership of the media that you read. And yes, we can see that not too many news outlets cover this topic. This article appears to be a blind spot for the left. There's plenty of center or right-wing coverage, but most of it is actually governmental coverage. For example, here we have Russia Today and TASS, both owned by the government of Russia. Well, what happened is that after Ecuador has voiced this idea of sending military equipment to America, which would then be sent to Ukraine, Russia essentially said that they have discovered certain pests in Ecuadorian bananas that could be potentially dangerous to Russian consumers or whatever. So right after that, what happened is that Ecuador decided that, well, since one of our biggest consumers is about to pull out, I guess we're not gonna send these weapons to Ukraine. So Ecuador pulled back on that, and Russia, as a response, also coincidentally found out that there's actually nothing wrong with Ecuadorian bananas and they can be imported to Russia just fine. So Russia essentially bullied Ecuador into doing this, right? But if you take a look at the headlines of Russian governmental media regarding this, they don't really mention the bullying. So I like to see through the narrative of the media that I consume. And if you guys want to do the same, go over to the link down description to ground.news/NFKRZ, subscribe through my link and take advantage of the 40% discount for the Vantage plan, which is the plan that I use when limited access to all the features, or get started by subscribing through the Pro plan for less than $1 a month. Huge thanks to Ground News for sponsoring this video, and let's continue on discussing this ridiculous story. So, Russia actually managed to bully Ecuador into stopping their support for Ukraine. However, the state-owned Russian Agricultural Bank forecasted that if the import ban was to be implemented, Russia would face a nationwide banana shortage as early as March. So basically, if Ecuador did not back out of supporting Ukraine, and if the ban stayed in place, then, well, obviously Russia would have like no fucking bananas for a while, because imports do get replaced eventually, but it does take time, but also, the price of bananas in Russia would obviously skyrocket, and therefore, they could have literally become a thing of luxury in Russia. Almost a thing of luxury, right? Which in my opinion, what this shows, right, is that the Russian governments essentially, they don't really care about the well-being of, you know, the regular people in Russia, what people get to eat and what people get to afford to eat, you know what I'm saying? They care way more about, you know, sticking it to the West, make sure that Ukraine doesn't get those Soviet weapons. We need to show them that we're ready to say this to the fucking grave. That's essentially their outlook, right?
Блять, опять реклама, ёбаная мразь нахуй.
They care about shit like that more than actually making sure that, you know, Russians have access to certain foods and actually can afford them. Which, once again, actually brings us to what I started this video off with, which was Russia destroying food. To give you guys some short context, what happened here is that in 2014, as you guys might know, obviously, Russia annexed Crimea, breached international law, and was sanctioned very heavily by a lot of countries of the world, European Union, America, etc. And actually, what's funny is that a lot of the sanctions that were imposed in 2014 on Russia were pretty personal sanctions that were mainly aimed at governmental officials of Russia and stuff like that. So the regular Russian people didn't really feel their effects, if that makes sense. However, the Russian citizens did feel the effects of the so-called counter-sanctions. Essentially, counter-sanctions were a number of measures by Russia in order to sort of respond to the West and to America to show them that not only do we not care about your pesky sanctions, but also we will create our own counter-sanctions so that you Westerners also suffer. And basically what this mainly led to is that Russia completely banned import of European food products. So pretty much anything you can imagine, cheese, meats, fruits, vegetable, etc, all of this was banned in Russia. And essentially long term, this led to a pretty drastic increase in the prices of a lot of food in Russia, specifically anything that comes from the agricultural sector, because in 2014, Russia's agriculture was actually rather shitty. So yes, back in 2014, a lot of regular everyday groceries got way more expensive and less affordable for Russians. However, the craziest part about all of this, once again, was the food destruction. Which once again, the whole idea here basically was, look, this Western foods, this terrible Western imported stuff with, you know, all this, you know, pesticides and, you know, GMOs or whatever, that bullshit they put in Europe and America to kill us here in, you know, in Russia. We don't need any of that crap, so instead of like, you know, finding a good use for it, we'll completely destroy it. And yes, essentially Russia, instead of, once again, finding some kind of use for this food, you know, there's a lot of people who are struggling. I don't know, you could have at least given it to the cattle or something. No, what they decided is that it's gonna be way funnier to destroy Western food in front of cameras and then upload that to the internet as some sort of fucking patriotic rage. I mean, it's really hilarious, guys. It actually reminds me a lot of the Nike boycott when people were burning their shoes because Colin Kaepernick did like a advertisement with Nike or whatever. It's just that in this case, you know, the people who already bought a product were burning it. And in the case with Russia, Russia was essentially destroying foods that it has already bought from Europe. So not only have you already paid for these foods, but also nobody's getting it. Yes, I can totally see the logic in that, you guys. Не достанься же ты никому. That's the fucking logic here. And also, like, I mean, once again, I just think this is like the most cynical, most insane thing ever. Destroying food while, you know, there's tons and millions of people in Russia actually that live below the poverty line, obviously struggling to afford this stuff. When people are actually struggling and dying out of fucking hunger because, you know, capitalism is a terrible fucking system. Oh my god, it's just so cynical. It's so cynical. And also, it doesn't even fit with like traditional Russian values. My parents always taught me that wasting food is bad. And even wasting one bite of food is kind of disrespectful to those who don't get to eat, you know what I'm saying? Also, I think in the Russian Orthodox Christian faith, there's this kind of whole thing about bread being the body of Christ and how you can't really do dumb shit with bread and essentially not treat it as food. You know what I'm saying? So you're basically breaking Russia's traditional Christian laws by destroying this food, you fucking idiots. Oh my god. So yes, basically what happened back in 2014 in Russia is that Russia annexed Crimea and a bunch of governmental officials and governmental companies got sanctioned by the West and European Union. The regular Russian people didn't really feel the effects of the sanctions personally, apart from like rising prices and inflation and everything. However, what Russians did feel, and what Russians actually got hurt by, were the counter-sanctions imposed by Russia itself to hurt the West. The Russian people basically now have less of a choice of the groceries that they buy. They don't have access to, great Italian cheeses and everything. And also their groceries got more expensive. So long story short, Russia has brilliantly shown the West by shooting itself in the foot. Now, there is actually an argument here that could be made that a lot of people make about how Russia essentially in 2014, before this entire ban and the new policy of импортозамещение, Russia's agricultural sector was pretty underdeveloped and Russia bought most of its fruit and vegetables from Europe. But after this ban, the Russian agricultural sector was actually forced to develop and now it's like a lot better. Yes, guys. That's cool and all, I'm just wondering why the agricultural sector had to wait until fucking 2014 and until we had no foods to actually start developing, you know what I'm saying? But yes, the situation is still very much going on today. Obviously, after the start of the war in Ukraine, Russia has seen a lot of new sanctions, a lot of new economic issues. There's a huge labor market shortage in Russia currently. There's a lot of inflation. The food prices are rising in Russia, and actually a lot of Russians, especially elderly Russians, for example, those who really struggle to get by, they can really barely afford the groceries. In fact, recently there's been a huge controversy in Russia where essentially what happened is that the price of eggs has risen over like 46% or something in just 1 year, which actually led to like a massive panic in Russia and a massive sort of almost like a movement within the Russian people where basically old people and like regular people who just can't afford groceries. First of all, there were a ton of videos coming out of Russia where you can see people standing in sort of, these Soviet era lines, basically just to buy eggs for cheap. Because eggs are just not affordable to buy in the regular supermarkets. Because these are like wholesale eggs or whatever and it's cheaper to get them. So you get those videos of tons of people in Russia waiting in lines to get these cheap eggs. And in fact, this became a pretty huge issue that started being discussed pretty widely by the public. And the governments and even Vladimir Putin himself had to publicly appear in front of the public. And he actually apologized in front of the entirety of Russia for this terrible mismanagement of egg prices that we are definitely going to fix. Yes, guys, great. Beautiful. I mean, we're basically going back to the Soviet Union with like government regulated prices or whatever the fuck and shortages of like foods. I mean, I don't even know what is happening. So yes, once again, you can clearly see that Russia is currently in a situation where there's a lot of inflation and the groceries out of the time are not really affordable for people, but Russia, a country that exports 9 out of the 10 bananas from Ecuador, will still go ahead and threaten Ecuador and actually already start imposing a complete ban on all of the bananas from Ecuador just so that, 2 Makarov pistols or the fuck don't get their way into Ukraine. You know what I'm saying? They will still do it because they're not really obsessed with the thought of, how hard is it gonna be to buy a banana in the Russian supermarkets or how affordable will, a bunch of bananas be for a regular Russian citizen. No, these are not the questions that the Russian government is really concerned with. What they're really concerned with is once again building an empire, reaching geopolitical goals, information warfare, fucking plugging your brain into the mainframe. You know what I'm saying? They care about their mission in the world to bring, traditional values and, to be defendants of conservatism in Europe, whatever the fuck. Essentially, Russia will do anything except make sure that the people of Russia are well fed and actually can afford their groceries. Which, once again, just shows me what a great government we have that is truly very invested in the people's well-being. And it totally makes sense to me why so many people in Russia still support this government that is definitely super interested in their everyday needs and their lives turning out great. You know what I'm saying? And yes, guys, this right here, the poverty, the hypocrisy, the cynicism of these food destruction campaigns, these are among of many things and many reasons why I left Russia. Anyways guys, I guess that's going to be pretty much it for today's video though. I wanted to remind you guys about this little episode of Russia destroying food back in 2014 and talk about the current situation in Russia regarding groceries and how Russia is bullying other countries into essentially submission by threatening them with import bans and so on. I wanted to talk about this because I believe it is a very illustrative example of how Russia treats its citizens. But anyways guys, on that note, I'm gonna be wrapping this video up. If you guys did enjoy it, then please make sure to slap the like on it. And as well guys, as always, if you'd like to support me additionally, and that is financially, then go over to the link down in the description and become a YouTube member. It is basically YouTube's own version of Patreon. It's a monthly donation type thing and it's the best way to support me. Or you can also leave a super thanks underneath this video. Thank you guys once again so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.